Southeast Asia is the fastest growing region in the world. Already the ASEAN region has become the equivalent of the 8th largest economy in the world, with a GDP of more than $2 trillion. While Malaysia, one of its most open economies, has growth rates of 5% a year. The future is right here in this room, and we could do so much more to make the most of it.
Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda sedang menonton kepada CARI, dan oleh itu malam ini Ketua Eksekutif CARI berada di sini, Saudara John Pang, dan apa yang dikatakan oleh Perdana Menteri David Cameron itu merupakan suatu pengiktirafan oleh seorang pemimpin negara yang begitu penting sekali. Dalam konteks itu, saya ingin membawa diskusi malam ini dengan melihat ke arah sinergi dan juga adanya jaringan yang penting untuk kita bina dan terajui menuju ke depan, iaitu lingkungan kerjasama ekonomi negara-negara ASEAN. Dalam konteks itu, CARI antara institusi yang secara sendiriannya, tak banyak institusi. Saya telah menjadikan 2 hari untuk topik ini. Tidak ada banyak kalau kita pergi ke internet tentang institusi yang melakukan kajian, menghimpunkan perkara-perkara maklumat strategik berkenaan dengan inisiatif ini. Oleh itu, mungkin itu yang akan dibincangkan oleh saya malam ini dengan lebih rapat lagi. I would like to again thank John Pang for making time to be on Astro Awani tonight, and maybe I'll start with that. The facts are there. You know, if we combine all the countries in ASEAN and look at the size of our economy, it's the 3rd largest in Asia, for example, and that alone makes us a very important player. But if we go alone, each of this country, and with the rise and emergence of 2 big economic powers, which is would be India and China, for example, where would we be? And a lot of articles will look back at about 500 years ago, the last time that this region was so prosperous, at the time when India and China were big superpowers. So in that sense, how do we move? Because in the old days it's easy, everything will come under one central rule. Malacca controls most of Southeast Asia, or if we go back to Sriwijaya before that, for example. But with the new era of nation states, relatively new, and in that sense, how do we work together? Because another added layer to this complex question is that we now want the private sector to lead. More and more in the national budget of a lot of countries, the private sector are taking the initiative, for example. And of course, with ASEAN, we also want to see that for economic relationship, because I think the political entity has done their best for the political side of ASEAN. But now, as we focus on the economic side, the private sector must take this lead. John Pang.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you, Kamaro. I think it's correct you harken back to an earlier era in which Southeast Asia played a larger role in the global economy, even than now. The key element in that success, that early sort of flourishing, if you will, is openness to trade, and the fact that it was the sort of trading post, the place of exchange between India, China, and the Middle East, and actually eventually to Europe. Now, the AEC, then, the ASEAN Economic Community as a project, is in that light not something completely new.
Yes.
Right? So, and as for your question about, I agree with you, it's time for the private sector to take a leading role, to step up to the plate, and not just wait for government initiatives. Business always is, by definition, something promoted privately. Now, I don't know why we find the reason why this is sort of new or strange is that ASEAN, actually, the fundamental nature of ASEAN has changed from being a very security-oriented organization, or more exclusively security-oriented, to being very much more oriented towards trade. And this has happened in the last 10 years or so, right, 10, 15 years. And increasingly, for example, since the signing of the ASEAN Free Trade Area, and then afterwards the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area recently, trade predominates in driving ASEAN forward. And when trade predominates, of course, you need private sector involvement.
If I look at the visit of Prime Minister Cameron, and he said that UK is now back in business and open for business, CARI and have seen this mantra being said by ASEAN itself, that ASEAN is open for business.
Yes.
So politics aside, and it has paved the way.
Yes.
So what now would you want to see? For example, from what Prime Minister David Cameron said, if we look at the total export and import between UK and Malaysia and UK and ASEAN, that's rather low for the amount of potential of synergies that we can have, looking back at the rich history even
Yes.
of 100 or 200 years ago.
Yes. Yes, there's huge potential there is still potential for increasing trade between the UK and Malaysia, right? Malaysia is the UK's 35th largest trading partner for goods, 38th largest for services, so we rank really low.
Yes.
But ASEAN in general ranks really low. I don't know, something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 9th or something like that.
10, yeah.
Very far down the list after sort of a whole list of after the US and European countries. Now, I think Prime Minister David Cameron is sort of bold and far-sighted, acting boldly in pushing towards, in recognizing the potential in ASEAN.
Yes.
And coming here and doing this tour, and despite considerable domestic troubles
Yes.
back home.
I totally agree with that. I have to go for the first commercial break, but once we are back, I remember asking this question when I was talking about the CSO, civil society organizations of ASEAN. Because if ASEAN was to become an ASEAN community in 2015, the people has got to interact. Cannot just be leaders, foreign ministers, and every other people with key positions meeting, but people to people. So for business, I would guess that businessmen to businessmen, businesswomen to businesswomen, entrepreneurs to entrepreneurs, technopreneurs to technopreneurs, this group of dynamic people must have its own platform within ASEAN to discuss all this. So how do we propose for this to happen? Trade has been happening, but we want it to multiply and move faster than ever because we don't have time. So let's discuss that after this short break. Politically, we have seen ASEAN really move. Some even give ASEAN the credit for Myanmar easing into democracy. Maybe some people will not agree with me coining it as that, but I do see change in Myanmar is happening, and I've been there in '97. I'll go back to Myanmar later, but first, the platform for the business side of ASEAN to get together. And while I was discussing technopreneurship, Silicon Valley and Malaysia, because now we also want to have a lot of technopreneurs. One of the things that these young technopreneurs, early 20s, who came to the studio will say that we don't have the ecosystem like in Silicon Valley. You sit in Starbucks there, you turn this side, there'll be a venture capitalist. You turn this side, there'll be a programmer writing new code. So you go that side, there'll be somebody who's built 5 companies and can share with you their experiences. And that's very crucial for them because they come back here, they don't really have that. But for ASEAN and the business side, how do you look at the ecosystem?
That's a large question. It depends on which industry we're talking about, right? But one element of that ecosystem is the networks, clearly the business networks and the links. So as I said earlier, having identified the need for business to take a leading role, we then decided to form a networking platform for businesses. So you mentioned that Prime Minister David Cameron said that the UK is open for business. Perhaps he was echoing our own motto for the ASEAN Business Club, which is ASEAN is open for business. The ASEAN Business Club is an independent business organization. CARI, of which I lead, is the secretariat for this organization. Now, the ASEAN Business Club consists of those business leaders leaders of the leading corporates in ASEAN, who are motivated to come together to help promote, catalyze ASEAN integration. So by their networking and by their own activities, their own regionalization and expansion, they want to push for ASEAN integration. So I believe this is an important platform. It's entirely voluntary. The business club is not an official organization. It's entirely voluntary. But and they represent themselves in their interest in ASEAN.
Agreed. How has it been so far for ASEAN Business Club?
The response has been really quite good. We're very happy to say that since we launched in October last year, we launched at a ceremony in Kuala Lumpur at a dinner officiated by Dr. Surin Pitsuwan, the Secretary General of ASEAN. Then in February, we had the opportunity, we organized a delegation to visit Myanmar. We felt that ASEAN wasn't sufficiently represented in what was turning out, we could see, into almost a gold rush there. Yes. And all this countries that had been pushing the sanctions were the first to sort of come in like that. And ASEAN, which had stood by Myanmar through really difficult times, right? When Myanmar was a sort of